I want to welcome you to the webinar. My name is Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at IIBA. For those of you who aren't familiar with IIBA, we are the International Institute of Business Analysis. So the question, does business analysis contribute to business data analytics? You're going to get those answers today. But first, let me give you some context. I've been in the business analysis profession for over 20 years. I'm CBAP certified. I have a certification in business data analytics. And I've learned firsthand through our work at IIBA on our data analytics work, just how important clear communication is. If you look at the description of a business analyst, a way I like to generalize it is we're communicators. We communicate with business stakeholders because we can speak the language that they speak. We can speak the language of the data scientist and the data analyst because we speak the technical language they speak. We're translators in a way, but communication is really important. And that's why business analysts really can be that conduit to maximize results for business analytics initiatives. Before I introduce Keith and David, what I want to do is encourage you to ask your questions in the Q&A box. So we've got a lot of chat going on right now, which is great. But if you have a specific question, please put it in the Q&A box because that's what we're going to be using. Now, you're going to be presented with a lot of information here. So as those questions come up, please drop them in there and we'll do our best to get to all of them today. In terms of this session today, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end, but I also want to let you know we have a LinkedIn Live session starting at 1:30 Eastern Time today. I'm going to be there with my regular co-host in terms of doing this live session, and maybe, just maybe, we can convince David and Keith to join us if there are a lot of questions. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Keith Ellis, but before I do, let me introduce him. Keith is our Chief Engagement and Growth Officer here at IIBA. In his career, he's most well known for building and selling a business analysis consulting practice. But Keith is less known for his home improvement pursuits, which he and I are both passionate about. If you get him talking flooring, be prepared for a long conversation. So without further ado, here's Keith Ellis.
Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And I think there's that movie where they were jousting, where they did the, here's Keith Ellis. And so I'm really going to have you on the front end of every presentation I do going forward from now on, Scott. I really appreciate that. And today, I think, the theme of this session, I want you to just visualize yourself in a room of 2,000 of your friends. That's what we've got going on today. Visualize looking to your left, looking to your right. And it's, if one of them is not involved in business data analytics, it's you, all right? Literally 1 in 3 of our community are involved in this. And so this is really important to be able to not only share with our community some guidance, what does this mean? What are some of the key skills that we really need to focus in on as a community? But what's the impact of our community on the success in this area? There's a sea change going on in here that we've got to get in front of, which is extremely important. David and I want to share not only the facts, like how do you quantify impact, and be very brutally frank and clear about some of that. But we want to also share some war stories, you know what I mean? Go through and share some of that success in the field. And I want 2 things. One is, if you have a question, this is all about you, our community. If we don't get it answered, we will make sure we get it answered at some, in the next week or so. So put it into the Q&A area. That way we see it. If you want to agree or you want to share an experience, you want the rest of the people in the community to hear that, put it in the chat. We'll let people know about it. Yeah, I saw this too, and this is what happened. Share that in the chat. We can come back and pick some of those up. But make sure your questions go into the Q&A area. And so the last thing is, I want to introduce David. So David, when we got into this whole thing and we started looking at the work and achieving more with data, I thought we got to get David involved. Good friend, but also, my gosh, look at the resume. I get to put, IIBA, a global expert panel member, because truly, global expert panel. And I think, the fact that you've written a couple of books that are the bestsellers in this area, that's all interesting. But the one that I really like in here is worked with almost, with 100 clients and successfully built out, these capabilities. And so a lot of that kind of war story conversation can come out today in terms of really putting some context around some of the things we're talking about. Color, David's a freaking rock star. I don't know if you saw that in the thing, but we're all kind of working. But what you may not know, and I appreciate that comment, I just went through so fast. What some of you may not know is David's been involved heavily in MMA, and I don't know how you still have all your teeth, my friend, but it's kind of one of these crazy things that you've been so involved in mixed martial arts over the years and let people actually come along and punch you in the head. But what the heck, David? Thanks for that.
It would be a dream for some people. I could share that with you, Keith. But the key is, hands up, chin down, mouth guard in, skid off the center line, stay on an angle. You stay in one piece that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let me very quickly, for so many of you here are going to know IIBA, but I think I want to just very quickly introduce to new people who don't know IIBA. International Institute of Business Analysis is really leading the global business analysis community and professional standards. So every person achieves more. And I think today, I just want to underscore that every person achieves more mantra, right? This is about you individually and collectively as an ecosystem. And that ecosystem starts with our members and our certification holders out there. It's so much about you. And it's so much delivered through our chapters. We have, chapters in 40 countries around the world, 120 of them. And it's this powerful network of people who are passionate about working together with our community and working together with local professionals to build that expertise. 600 now corporate, academic, and institutional training partners. It's just a phenomenal number that's all enabling that ecosystem and working together to build standards as well as implement those. And I want to thank, we have 1,300 volunteers. I want to thank you all for participating today, but also just participating with IIBA and advancing the standards or our chapters and working together in so many special ways and contributing. Because I think, without that group and without the participation of our members, there really isn't an IIBA. So I appreciate all of you. There's a lot of data that we're going to present. David and I are going to walk through today. So principally, I get to do the geek out on the data stuff. I get to turn to David and say, hey, David, let's comment. What are you hearing? What am I hearing? We get into a conversation. But knowing that we're dealing with a community of business analysis professionals, I'm thinking we should let you know where this is coming from, okay? This is coming from a study called Achieving More with Data. One of the elements, there's 5 pieces to that study. One of the elements is a large-scale research effort that is behind this whole thing. And so just so you know, this is 300 survey respondents. A lot of the data is coming from that. 70% are director and above. Okay, so that's where it's going, and it's mixed between or split between business and IT on the way through. And we balance the sectoring and things like that. So the data is pristine as you want to walk through and walk it out. I also want to thank our corporate members for participating. Without you, it's very hard. You just can't execute on this stuff. And so this set of organizations and organizations that participate in this area, so much of this is about building that capability in business analysis, but also understanding what the future is going to be about and how does that work. If you are a gold or platinum member and you have not booked your deep dive yet in this area, please reach out to your account manager. We will make sure that that gets set up because we want to make sure that you're using this and driving this tremendously within your organization. There's just a lot of material here, and there's like 80 slides in behind the whole thing that we got to get through. Let's go into what we're going to talk about. And oh, by the way, if we don't hit all 4 of these, you can send the cranky email to me, okay? And we'll go through that, all right? So this is really all about 4 big things. The impact of data analytics and how does it have, like, what does it really mean to be data driven? To me, that's a fundamental shift because the world is shifting in this direction that we need to step back and say, how is this data driven thing really going to impact? How big is this, right? And I think there's a lot of good answers on that particular one. The critical role of business analysis, when we did that upfront poll, we said, hey, what are people interested in? The majority of you said, I really want to understand the impact of business analysis, and it's huge. I've got one really amazing summary chart in here that I also want to share with everybody, make sure that it has. And Christina, to your point, how are becoming data-driven organizations and digital transformation related? I'm going to make sure that we pin that one down on the next slide. Okay, so we're going to pin that one down. The next one is getting into the essential skills, because that was the next biggest thing that we wanted to focus in on, the essential skills. And there's 6 of them that are really critical, and they all relate back into the guide to business data analytics and the sequencing in there, and then how the core business data analytics practices contribute. We really need to bring that back to the business and business impact. Okay, does that sound like a good plan for everybody? Hopefully nobody says no at this point in time, because the slides are locked and loaded. We're all ready to go. So let's just start with this whole, what's the impact data analytics has on today's business and this need to become data driven. David, I've been talking for a bit. Let me turn it over to you. And how would you define data driven? What is this thing that we call data driven? What does that mean to be a data driven enterprise?
Yeah, it's a great question, Keith, because I think we should start with most companies are not data driven. Data driven means we truly understand and use data before making our corporate decisions. Statistically speaking, most decision makers within a company are not data driven. They go primarily on gut instinct. I think I have a great story on this one. There was I don't want to name the company, but large apparel maker. They make gorgeous women's apparel. And very, very well known, internationally known company. And I was meeting with the chief merchandising officer, the CMO. And the guy looks at me, Keith, right at the beginning of the discussion. He goes, you know what? I look at Twitter and I go with gut instinct to make decisions. And while that was a very honest answer, it also helped me understand why for 5 consecutive years, their profits were down and their overall revenue was down. So their margin was decreasing steadily while their revenue was also decreasing, because they were using gut instinct rather than data-driven decision making. And that is one of the big challenges companies have, is switching to that mindset. And it takes a focused effort to make it happen. It will not happen on its own. There has to be a focused effort.
That's a great point, David. And I think just real quick, I'm going to answer 2 or 3 questions that have bumped through. So Julie, the guide to business data analytics, go up, you're a member, get onto the Knowledge Hub and look for data analytics. Okay, it'll be right there and you'll be able to see it, and it'll give you some good guidance and advice. And then we have another one coming in from Tom, who's basically saying, can we help people distinguish between business analysis professional, the title, and data analytics domain? And I'm going to do that next. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I give you a sense of this thing, because one is the technology and the other is the profession. We got to make sure we're distinguishing those two. To me, I think data driven, there's this whole sea change in terms of how companies run. And I just want to kind of give a slide. And this is an amazing quote from the CIO of Boeing, right? When we give people, when they believe in the data, it's a game changer, because I think we're at the beginning of a real sea change. When the internet started showing up in a much bigger way back in 2000, people said, it's going to be e-commerce, and there's this massive change. But we didn't anticipate things like SaaS and cloud computing and the massive shift in the cost of storage that was going to happen as a result, and where all this began to go. And today we're at a very, very different position. We're at a similar level of adoption in terms of some of the business data analytics technologies we're talking about, right? And so I don't know that we can fully anticipate where this is going to go as an industry. But what we know is that people tend to underestimate the long-term impact of what data-driven is truly going to be. We're now moving into a world of segments of one. If I'm a retailer today and I can't reach out to David and say, you're this person who likes to get punched in the head by MMA people, I'm not marketing to him as his own professional. I'm not providing the relevance. If I'm a retailer and I'm in Europe someplace and I don't have this in place, I am dying. I just don't know it yet. It's the same transition that happened around some of the technologies in internet and e-commerce, right? I want to give this slide here. I don't want to belabor it. I just want to give you a real sense. People were asking, Tom, you asked the question, what's the difference between the profession and the segments in the model, okay? This is a great way to explain it in a non-technical way to your constituents. There are basically 5 different layers. It's that whole area of descriptive, which is data mining, business intelligence, the whole area of diagnostic. Very, very simple until you move across to prescriptive, which is where you start talking about machine learning, neural networks, these kinds of things. And then you get into cognitive, which is that advanced learning systems. Think self-driving cars. The world here is now much more sophisticated when the organization can sense and respond to change on its own, right? Can sense and respond to an individual consumer coming in with a question, and the systems are intelligent enough to say, this is how I should respond based on wealth or these other kinds of things. Like there's just a lot in behind the way, and then the ethics of that, right? In terms of how we then orchestrate for questions. So these are all different layers. This is a great way of explaining it too, because so much of data literacy is in behind. And I think what I'm going to share with you is just some facts, okay? There is $215 billion right now being spent on business data analytics, and it's the fastest way of growing, or that is the fastest market in information technology spending today. 75% of executives believe their organization needs to be data-driven. 80% say their business is going to be disrupted in the next 2 years. This is huge. And the average ROI, 30%. That's what we found in our study. So this is not just small stuff. It's big in terms of, 30% of our own population are involved in this area. So it's important, right? I think the bigger ones is, why are people doing this? And it's really related to this area of improving productivity, improving revenue, improving agility and speed. Those are the three biggies for the top performers out there. And what does that really mean is it's fundamentally re-architecting how some of these organizations physically go to market, right? It's shifting how business is done in much the same way that the internet shifted and e-commerce shifted how business is being done. Now, what's interesting in here is see the three little stars beside it? I know everybody's got the bionic eyeballs. You can see the three little stars. Those three poor performers, the laggards, is what we found. Those organizations are terrible at achieving those three objectives. So the top three things in here, because they're not using business analysis professionals to help drive a lot of this underlying focus on value and value realization, many organizations are not efficient at targeting those top three objectives. And I'm sure, David, you got your war stories in those areas.
Oh, goodness. This slide, Keith, we can spend an hour on this slide alone, because I think it's so pertinent. But I want to go back to something that the CIO of Boeing said. I adore that quote, where he said, let me get this right. If they believe in the data, it's a game changer. Why do sometimes our decision makers not believe in the data? Two main reasons. The data is inaccurate, and it's misunderstood. Too many times within our companies, we will have, you'll talk to the head of the HR department and say, how many, or the head of sales, how many customer types do we have? And they'll say 10. And then you speak to somebody else in sales, they'll say 15. Then you look at the data, you find 4, 5, 700 different values for customer type. So often our data is mismanaged, it's misunderstood. And when that happens, if people don't trust the data that we're showing, just like Ted had mentioned from Boeing, you're not going to have that game changer experience. And just to tie this into business analysis, that's one of the things a great business analyst does. They understand how important it is to have that data be accurate and understood, and to not take, we just get our data from this database. I'll give you a good quick war story. Massive car company. I own one of their automobiles. They have a CFO, so now I definitely will not give the company name. CFO comes in and he says, hey, or he discovers that they need to give rebate checks to people who owned a particular car model. And these were expensive rebate checks, $500, $600. They send these out to thousands of people. One of the people who got the rebate checks was the CFO. There's only one problem, Keith. He didn't own the car. So when he gets into the office, as you could imagine, it looked like a horror movie, because he calls the CIO in and says, what is going on? And it ties into all of this. Why? What happened? They probably had somebody very sloppily pull a database, said, oh, this is the people who bought that car, with no good business analysis to understand, wait a minute, here are the business processes behind that database. And that's how you get these terrible situations that we just can't have. I adore this slide. I think this is
Yeah.
part of some fantastic research. Everybody should make sure they have a copy of this one hanging in their office.
Absolutely. I'm going to answer two real quick questions, and then we're going to start moving along a little faster. So Damon and Rick, would a data-driven organization have hardline hierarchies? In fact, data-driven allows us to make a much flatter organization, okay? Because you're getting the information to those people who can respond in real time and make decisions faster at a lower level in the organization. It's less hierarchical, which is inherently much more experiential. Can you assess, Rick, if an organization is data-driven or not? Yes, there are certain characteristics that have to be true, and I will show you some of those as we go through. One of them is the role of the business analysis professional. And I want to pause and give you this story. This came out loud. InBev, it is, I think, the largest beer maker in the world. Take a minute, read the story. It is fantastic. What I want people to do from this, if you're in a leadership role, CIO, and you're participating, this idea of a business analysis professional needs to be part of and accountable for output. Take that and make sure you're thinking about implementing it, because if this is not the case, there are 6 BDA practices. If the business analysis professional is not driving it, frankly, you are not a data-driven organization. You need to think about this. That means stepping up skills and capability on the business analysis side. It also means greater accountability and needs results on the back end, but it's what has to happen because the data is so overwhelmingly clear on the impact. This is a 1-slide summary of 80 slides of data. It is critical for me to walk it through just a little bit, and then I'm going to get to the cultural change piece, which is one of David's absolutely exciting slides. This is the one he loves to talk to.
And Keith, I just want to interject with one quick question. It's the dollar signs. Are these US dollars, Canadian dollars, other dollars?
Sorry, on the other one, that's the US dollars.
Okay, thank you.
So let's walk through this one here and kind of say executive commitment to being data-driven. That really does start the whole thing, and then fostering action, because it's a change in culture, right? It's a change in structure, but also business analysis is integrated into the business and is focusing the value. That one piece, there are 6 BDA practices that are so foundationally critical that if they are not in place, the failure rate is 2.8 times higher, not a little bit higher, 2.8 times higher. So we can conclude that business analysis has to be integrated into the business and maintaining that focus on value. When that happens, organizations are 27% better at the BDA practices. There's 190% more use of business analysis. You get excellence. Oh, by the way, the ROI is 3 times higher. Okay, it's not just a little higher, it's 3 times higher versus the laggards versus the leaders. There's 19% more funding into strategic outcomes like those 3 that I showed you before, okay? So when you think about performance and business agility, those are the outcomes that these leaders are targeting. Any vendor listening into this discussion today, hey, you want to get outside of a pilot? This is what you need to be focusing on, is that business analysis capability, because you're 72% more likely to be enterprise-wide and enroll it if you're using business analysis professionals to drive this. You're also 104% more advanced in your use of analytics, the scope and breadth and sophistication of what you're putting in place. If you don't have it in, you're the opposite side of this whole thing. My feeling is that this leads us to believe you are a sustainably better organization. Sustainably better. It is hard to replicate this in. There are certain things you absolutely need to get right. And oh, by the way, there's a vast difference between the way that the laggards, and they are self-identified as laggards, okay, versus leaders, and it's very convenient, they self-identify themselves as ahead or leading, best in class, approach this. When they approach it and they are using business analysis professionals only to focus in on understanding, verifying, reporting results, etc., you're doing a disservice. Look at the vast difference in building a data culture and trust in the data, influencing decision makers and driving action, and ensuring accurate, quality, and accessible data. The leaders move that into the business analysis professionals domain. In fact, they're using business analysis professionals in those areas 50% or twice as often, so 100% more often than the laggards. It's huge difference. Those 3 layers in here are massively different, but all 6 of these, those are the 6 foundational things that a business analysis professional needs to produce in their role. David, I know this is one of your favorite slides. Why don't I turn it over to you to talk about what you see in day in, day out?
Absolutely. Again, this is a slide that everybody should have hanging in their office, because this is really the heart of the matter. Keith, you were kind enough to mention all the organizations, whether federal or corporations I've worked with over the years, and it's all about success and failure. It's very simple. We need to do the things that make the difference between failure and success. And this list of 6 to me is exceptional. Building a data culture and trust in the data. Let me give one of the secret things people don't realize. To become data driven, that takes organizational change management. That's what it takes. We have to change the way people do their work. And when we talk about the second best practice, influencing decision makers to be data driven, let me give the dirty secret of analytics that nobody speaks about. There is no reason to build an analytic that will not change the way somebody makes a decision. The entire purpose of analytics is to influence decision makers. That's why we do it. That, hey, based on these sales numbers, we need to do A. Maybe the sales are down, which we need to do B. This is what we need to be doing. And great analytics, great business analysis focuses on a business problem. Let me give a war story here, because I know everybody loves the war stories. Massive hospital, one of the most prestigious in the world, longtime client partner of ours. They did an RFP, Keith, they did an RFP where they said, we need to build a data warehouse for cancer analytics. We did, Keith, we did what you're absolutely not supposed to do. We said, you're not ready to build that. You need to have proper data management. You need to have proper data governance. You need to have a good enterprise model. You need to build out your business analysis function. And because until you do these things, you can't get the type of warehouse that they wanted. Because Keith, here's the thing. They wanted a warehouse that they were going to put people's life on the line. They were going to have these world-class doctors, guys like David Ahlquist and Pete DeGroon, using this. And finances are critical and they're vital. But when you're putting somebody's life on the line, that data needs to be accurate. It needs to be well understood. We better understand the business problem, and we better make sure we're hitting it on the mark. And it's one of those situations where for some odd reason, they selected us, even though we did what we're not supposed to. That analytics engine is saving lives now 10 years later, won all kinds of awards. And that's what I want to share with people. Get to the heart of the business matter. I know we have a lot of business analysts on this webinar. You guys are seminal to that success.
Absolutely. And I see a couple of great questions I just want to pick up real quick. You know, Jamie, your question around how does drive toward data-driven differ from the previous trend of business intelligence? And I'm going to say, I'll answer this, and I want David, you're going to weigh in on this, and as well as some other ones coming in. Business intelligence is a very narrow domain, right? It's one of many layers in here versus the predictive, the analytic, machine learning, and the cognitive systems of the future. So when we look at business intelligence, it's really all about, well, what happened, right? Versus what could happen, or how do we use these systems to then automate our response to customers? It's a very narrow domain. The world today is, think of it as we're just at the beginning of sea change as to what data-driven is truly going to mean to an enterprise, and how it's going to shift the actual competitive focus and response rate of an enterprise, and the speed of being able to get out and change in the in the world. David, did you want to weigh on that particular one? I think it's an interesting question.
It's a sensational question. And just as you shared, our landscape is changing with prescriptive analytics, with automated analytics, with cognitive analytics. It's such an exciting time to be in this industry, and it is about competitive advantage. I will share that. I have a whole pyramid that I use to define requirements. To me, what we do, meaning we as a whole professional, we look at, we are solving business problems or capturing business opportunities. We should not be doing build it and they will come. That is not a great strategy. And a good analyst, you understand this. We're solving problems or capturing opportunities, and the new techniques that are out there, the new approaches. I remember back in the 90s when we were building these warehouses, it's so exciting to see how we've matured, and machine learning and AI is truly a disruptor in the field. And I know we'll talk more about it as we proceed, but boy, it's an exciting time to be in the industry. And we all need to stay on the leading edge of this because it's vital to our careers.
Well, and Philip, one of the questions that you've asked is building a data culture. Your company is project oriented rather than data oriented in many cases. How can you as a BA change that culture to be data driven? There's actually, I'm going to walk that through, like Gottfried, building data culture, including customer physics. It should be part of the trust. They should be able to trust the company. There's a lot of pieces in there. There's nuance, because so much of becoming data driven is success. So how do we as a community enable the success? How do we bring the results that are on that prior page? And David and I are going to walk into a lot of detail on that in the next, couple of slides on the way through here, because I think it's about the sequencing. When you approach it using the Guide to Business Data Analytics, there's a certain sequencing that you're using to go and drive this thing through. But we'll start with what the data has said in our results as I start to answer that question, because it's critically important. How do I approach this? Now, David, I want to pick up one other thing in machine learning, because where does a business analyst professional need more knowledge in machine learning? How do we focus in on that as an area? And I know you've got a lot of depth in machine learning yourself because you spend a lot of time in that area.
Absolutely. Machine learning is so exciting. Machine learning, and I'm trying to think of a way to summarize its capabilities. In the past, to really understand our data, it was a very manual process. Maybe there was some profiling tools that could show us min-max, variances between values, some basic stuff. Doing that manually takes hundreds, if not thousands of hours. Machine learning now to say, hey, here's a good set of data for this business term, and being able to have a machine learning algorithm automatically look at your data, give it a confidence score, show you the outliers and the data points of concern is complete. Keith, it's changing my job fundamentally, and how I even reference software and make software recommendations. To me, if a vendor doesn't have machine learning capabilities, and then probably they're going to have a hard time getting my recommendation, because it's that seminal. How could I tell a client partner, go with this software, knowing that without those capabilities, it could cost us thousands of hours of person power on the back end? I can't.
Well, and it's also answering the right business question, like back to your earlier point, when we really look at these are tools to achieve a business outcome and an objective. So when we really think about machine learning, and we start understanding and unpacking, and you're using that in, say, wealth management to do product recommendations, it's because it's such a complex grid of where and what do we know about this person and what should we be bringing forward. At the end of the day, it all comes back to what's that business question that's being asked and answered. And are we actually answering a business question that's valuable to the company? Because you can have $100 million get spent on this stuff. In fact, there's a great example in the research of a company that spent 100 million, literally, I think 20 million on this. And oops, the business didn't use it because it wasn't focused in on what is the business question that we should be asking and answering here. So I think, Rachel, one of the big things that we think about is the new world going forward. You need, as a business analyst, to know these skills. Like I'm going to talk to and bridge into essential skills and opportunities. When we talk about data driven, it is important for a business analysis professional to understand what are these market spaces, what are some of the big tools, what do we mean by some of these things, what's being asked and answered, so how do we apply it? That's understanding data literacy. And David, I know you spend a lot of time in that area, but it comes back to business value. We're not trying to turn business analysis professionals into data scientists. That's not what we want to do. because that's not going to lead to success. Business analysis professionals need to stay business analysis professionals, because at the end of the day, the challenge in this market and what's prevented it from being hugely successful is the anchoring to the business problem, to make sure that the right business problem is being solved with these kinds of tools, because the data science is not a panacea. David, did you want to quickly speak to that? And I'll start stepping into this next piece of the actual underpinning data that supports all this.
Yeah, Keith, you hit the nail exactly on the head. It is about solving business problems. I have a client partner today, a large manufacturing company, and they really need some great analytics. And at one point they looked at me and said, well, okay, so what kind of analytics do we need? I said, wait, I'm not going to answer that. As far as specific applications, I said, that's up for your people who are in the front lines of the supply chain. That's for your people in the factory. That's for your people who deal with this day to day, the real business people. Keith, what you had said is spot on. We have to build analytics that solve specific business problems. And it is, as a business analyst, this is our job. And I loved your comment about don't become a data scientist, although that's a wonderful career. Stay where you're at because you are needed desperately. I will just share, Keith mentioned that there's a company that wasted, $100 million on some analytics and it didn't go well. Let me tell you, Keith, the majority of companies will waste their first couple hundred, if we're talking global 2000 companies, they will waste their first couple $100 million on analytics before they realize they need to start doing it right.
Yeah. And there's a maturity in terms of how they approach it. And so let's walk through, because I've got questions from Stephen, from Andrea, from a whole series of people. Well, let's talk about the formula. What do we need to do? What are these areas that we focus in on? What are the skills and why? And I think that's really critical to kind of drill down on, because that's the practical rubber hits the road, okay? And so let's talk about those essential skills. And I think we should start off with some context, okay? First and foremost, when we look at this, it is an area of high demand for business analysis capabilities. 41% of companies out there reported a skill gap over the next 2 years. It is the #1 area of demand right now in business data analytics is business analysis. Why? Because we just showed you, it's so foundational to success. There's two classes of companies. There's really those who are putting business analysis professionals into the leadership role and saying, you guys are now accountable for this. You need to make it work. You need to make sure this is focused on value. And those who are not doing that, and therefore they're laggards. And the gap between them in performance is so big. Now, when you step into that role, there's a lot you need to know, right? There's a lot of fundamental blocking and tackling, executing that needs to happen. But when you look at the demand shift, it's 17% in 2000, 30% planning the move in 2021. It's rocket ship. And then 36% of business analysis professionals are involved. And that's, I'm doing a session on Thursday with our Vancouver chapter. And there's this wonderful lady who's being brought in to elaborate it. And she was just pulled into a data analytics activity out of the blue and said, you need to do this because the owner was. So I want people on this call to be prepared for that and know where some of those key resources are so you can go and be successful as you get pulled in, because this is foundational overall to our profession and our practice. David, did you want to add to that before I jump to the next slide?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give an unsolicited plug here. If I know we have a lot of people on this webinar, if you're not a member of IIBA, this slide should convince you, the previous slide should convince you to go get a membership. Where can you get, I mean, I was fortunate enough to be a key contributor to this study. Where do you get this kind of data that you can leverage within your job outside of IIBA? So it's exceptional work. And I don't think I'm biased because you brought me in, Keith. I think the work that was done, Keith and I get to be on the webinar, but there's so many people behind the scenes. Exceptional work. Take these statistics, run with them. And if you're not an IIB member, what are you doing? So I just want to give an unsolicited plug before.
No, I appreciate that, David. Absolutely. And I think part of this too is look at what Joe is saying here, guys. Like, some individuals will have this ability to level up, some will not. There's a monster skill gap in here though. right? And it's understanding what is data literacy and some of these other things. But you see this push, and thank you so much for the plug. And I see a lot of people saying, I'm a member, I'm a member, I'm a member. So just keep telling everybody you're a member. This is really an ecosystem, and it's about all of us working together to drive some of this. Melissa, you're an auditor. Reach out to me afterwards. I've got another thing going with the Internal Auditors Association to talk about with you. But this is something that's an important chart because the focus is so much on the business analysis professional. The execution has to be solid in this area. I'm going to suggest, Gina, thank you. The CBDA, make sure you look at what that is, because it'll give you some of these foundational skills that you need in executing in here, the Certified Business Data Analytics certification, because I'll connect the dots for you on this next one. One of the challenges in this area when you look at external research, and we had to peel this one back, one of the issues in here was the failure rate is so extreme. Even though there's $200 billion invested, Dave, to David's point, that first 100 million is getting wasted. But there's such a need to drive in this direction that more and more and more gets spent. And this is one of the foundational charts that I want to share to people. When you're a laggard and you're beginning your journey, you're that early stage organization, you're not that leader, right? And you begin your journey, if you're not leading it, these 6 BDA practices using a business analysis professional, your failure rate is 2.8 times, not 2%, not 5%, 300% higher, okay, or almost 300% higher, if you're not using a business analysis professional. Because this is not about the technology, it's not about the data science, it's about the anchoring to business value. But more importantly, the business analysis professional truly understands the way the business functions from a process perspective. And the way the business functions from a process perspective begins to inform, well, what data do we need? What systems are informing that? And it builds the confidence in the data. These are critically important. What's happening here is the reason why there's such high failure rate is people think data science can go and do this on their own. And they throw a data science team out there and they say, okay, guys, go add value to the business. And unfortunately, those poor people are set up for failure. It kills them, right? Because they don't have that understanding of the business, and they can't pull that into their projects, and they're peripheral to the business, and the business doesn't understand them, right? And what you want are awesome data science people, not necessarily awesome business analysts who are also data science people. David, I know you can speak to this one.
Oh, I have to share a story. I have to share a story, Keith. So massive company, everybody here would know who they are. They spent $14 million on hardware. They bought the most expensive software money could buy for an analytics implementation. So probably another 8 million there, and probably another 10 million on services. So well north of a $30 million spend, Keith. Would you like to know how much data they had in this warehouse? 2.4 gig. 30 million. I mean, I have a flash drive. Here, wait a minute. Let me. I have this flash drive could easily store 10 times the amount of data in their data warehouse, and they bought the largest, most expensive box money could buy. Keith, I believe in having room to grow, but this is ridiculous.
It's going in the wrong direction. Now I want to get to some fundamental skills, okay, everybody, because this is where the rubber hits the road, and the data in the report versus the guide to business data analytics. Because when you're building skills and running projects, go and get the guide to business data analytics, because that is written for you as a business analysis professional, building skills, executing on projects, and understanding the sequencing. The BDA practices, and there are 6 of them, okay? These are the 6 things. Think of that as we're architecting capability for success in an industry. 2 different things that we're trying to deal with, okay? And there's this one slide maps the 2 of them together. So if you're starting a project, see that number 3? Properly identify the business problem and identify the right questions to answer. If you do that really, really well, what ends up happening is you drive that active engagement of the business, right? You get them interested, say, yeah, that's critically important. You've done this root cause. This is what's happening all the time. If we can only identify that more often, I think if we could do that, this is how we could implement it in the business. And people start talking that through and you build that up. And by doing that, you start identifying, well, if these are the questions you've got to answer, this is the data, and these are the data sources, and these are the systems. So now you're into the box 5. And then you start coming back through, and you're dealing with 4 and 6 simultaneously, understanding, verifying. Now, all of this is written out in the Guide to Business Data Analytics, okay, the GBDA. So when you look at your certification, focus in on the Guide to Business Data Analytics and the CBDA certification to help you build that core set of skills. This research here is really underscoring a couple of really foundational things. First and foremost, 3 of these things, number 1, 2, and 5, business analysis professionals have to be accountable for, okay? The leaders do it twice as often. And what happens is success in the other things drives that cultural shift, okay? Success in these other things drive that cultural shift that happens at the front end. That's why organizations like AB InBev have really said, no, wait, abandon all this other stuff. Business analysts, you're now accountable for this thing. Make it work, okay? So when you look at the sequencing, just adjust the sequencing. Are you driving the foundation, meaning the sea change on the cultural shift, which is this chart, versus are you driving a project and go to the Guide to Business Data Analytics? David, I know this is over to you because this is seminal stuff.
Oh, goodness, it is. There's so much here I could touch upon, but I want to talk about data literacy just for a moment. Data literacy is such a hot button topic in our industry. We're actually building a massive data literacy program for Homeland Security, one of the key branches. And one of the challenges in that is how do you up the data literacy for thousands of employees? And if you think having a live instructor do all of it, good luck. It's really created automated measurement and automated reassessment is vital for this. You have to build an automated system for this because it is such a seminal area that data literacy, if we don't understand just fundamentals, like I'll give you one, Keith, here's one for you. Perfect correlation, what we always want. Do you know everybody who has died in the last 100 years who is an adult have all eaten an apple? That means apples cause death. Perfect correlation. Well, as we would all understand immediately, correlation does not always equal causality. And those little tidbits and that knowledge, that real data literacy is something we need. So I could keep going on this, but when you're building your literacy program, automate it. Especially when you're talking about thousands of people, you can't just do it all live. So it really takes work. So just a little tidbit.
Well, and you know, apples are bad for you. It's in the Bible, my friend. Okay, so let's look at this too. So there's a lot of work here as well for the corporate program members. So make sure you get your deep dive, because inside report 5 is a complete roadmap around how each of these things is built out, the underlying skills in here, the sequencing, and some great advice for those corporate program members who have got report 5. So get that, make sure you look at it, make sure you read it. It's out today, and you'll get into the details of how to make sure you're implementing this. For our members, the team made a huge effort to push hard on getting the Guide to Business Data Analytics into the Knowledge Hub. So it's all right there, okay? So that layering for the personal skills, make sure you get in there and take a look at that material, okay? One of the things we're gonna go into is the core of data analytics practices contributing to the quality of analytic activities. That's the last one. And I really want to start with, this is about business value. The whole idea of value realization is the domain of business analysis. That's what our profession is all about, right? And so when you go to this new space and this world, can keep this and some this quote from Mark Griffin on your wall, as David says, because we're not stepping into a completely new domain and world. We're stepping into this world that we really understand well, which is what's valuable to the business. What changes in the business do we need to make to maintain this sensibility of value? This is the heart of our profession, right? We need to maintain that focus as we go through this, and it's central to everything we do. David, do you want to talk to this one before I get to punchline on some of the data?
Absolutely. Mark has is just dead on in his comment here. Too many times companies say, what technology do I need? Rather than asking the question, are we really answering the business's key questions? Once we know what kind of questions we need to answer, the tech falls into place. So I think this is such an important concept, because people think if I just purchase a tool, that solves the problem. But I liken analytics tools to building a fence. What tools does it take to build a fence? Now, sadly, I shouldn't even bring this up because both Scott and Keith have so much more knowledge about this stuff than me. I don't know a dang thing about it, but I probably throw a better head kick than either one of them. Anyway, when it comes to building a fence, what tools do you need? Hammer, a saw. You need duct tape, right? You always need duct tape. Anyway, a shovel. With those tools, do you have a fence? No, you do not. You first need requirements for the fence. Is it a metal fence? Is it a wood fence? Do I want a short fence, 3 feet high, 6 feet high? Is it actually achieved? Do we have pets that we need to fence in? Is the fence achieving our goals? And these analytics tools are just like the hammer, the saw, and the shovel. Without the business analysis, they are not useful. So let's make sure we get that right. So I just think this quote is spot on.
You know, and I think I'm going to speak to this one, and then I'm going to be reaching over to Scott, I know we've got a ton of questions coming in, and David, I think you and I are going to the after party. I've never actually been to an after party after a webinar just to answer some of these, because they're getting some amazing ones. But Zahara and a bunch of other people are asking, hey, can I get a copy of the recording and the slide deck afterwards? And Scott, I want you to speak to that, because people are getting that. They can get access to it. But here's some punchline, okay, that people want. I want to make sure that you have that one slide front and center on where is the return coming from. But I want to also show you this slide here. The laggards have a 19% ROI. Oh, by the way, 19%, that ain't bad at all. Okay, guys, that ain't bad. Now, so a very large percent of the organizations are laggards out there. And unfortunately, it's like 2/3 of them, okay? 65%, I'd rather be in that camp, 3X, okay? I'd rather be that guy who's getting that kind of return. But take a look at the difference in terms of business analysis led. It's like twice as much use of business analysis, and they are really good at those 6 BDA practices. They're excellent at that, and because of that, the ROI and the sustainability of their organization is much higher in this area. Okay, and because they're connecting the way they're doing business analysis to the way they do their governance work, and the way they're evolving their processes to the way they're doing their governance work through the business analysis practitioners, they evolve much faster. Okay. The last piece is the skill gap. It's this perception of the role. The problem is with many organizations, they're just not seeing the business analysis role and how seminal it is. And this is where we're all working as an ecosystem together to educate. We're educating on the importance of things like the 6 BDA practices, pieces like the CBDA and the business data analytics guide to business data analytics, and how seminally important that is, because it's not about data science. That's a piece. It's not about technology. Well, it is, that's a piece, but it's about business value. And how do we systemically realize business value at scale, which is really this business analysis part that we're talking about. So I think part of what we're going into today is making sure that people really understand these pieces, as well as making sure that, we've answered the 4 questions that were posed, David. Have we really gotten there? Because I want to make sure we get the cranky email if we didn't do this stuff, right? On the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, I think there's a wealth of information here. And I think that people, I know the slides are being made available to everyone. These are slides, people asked in our chat, how do I sell this? How do I get senior management on board? We had some questions on that, Keith.
Yeah.
You use this deck. Pull the numbers like, hey, your failure rate is almost 3 times more probable if we don't do this. Look at the return on investment being triple between the high performers and the laggards. Leverage these, because I will tell you right now, I am leveraging them.
Yeah. And I think as well, like bring your team into the corporate program where a lot of this work is being done and driven in and socialized, because so much of this is making sure that people have the information and the facts and that it's being socialized. I mean, our corporate program is designed for this. It's making sure that the teams and the executive have this information to help socialize it within your organization and begin educating, because so much of this is, it's a sea change, and it's recognizing roles and making sure that you're making investments in the right area. Scott, some quick questions from you that we should be picking up, because I know the questions are rolling through so fast. My gosh, we weren't necessarily able to pick them up. And I know you also have some the after party that we're gonna be picking up. So let me just jump to that one so you can tell people about it, and then let's just come back to some of the questions. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. So in about 30 minutes, we're going to be on LinkedIn Live. That's a live stream. And Susan and I are going to be talking about what we've seen here in this webinar. You're right, Keith, there have been a ton of questions. I've got over 40 so far that I've captured that we're prioritizing to get through. We haven't been able to get them all through here, so we're going to pick them up in that session. And thank you for David and Keith for joining us on that session to help us answer these questions. What I'm hearing from the community in my observation is a lot of questions about how do we do this? How do we get into this? And I saw a few comments. This webinar is way too short. It's great to see the excitement. It's great to see the excitement about this. And definitely, there's lots of demand. So we can definitely share more information about this to help equip our community in understanding this and sharing this really important message with their organizations.
Well, and anybody who is gold or platinum, make certain that you get the deep dive schedule, because we're doing those now. And also, if you're part of the corporate program at all, make sure you get the 5 reports, because this is 1 hour of distillation against a lot of material that's been published and all the underpinning data that goes with this thing. It's hugely important. And again, I want to thank all of our volunteers who are involved. I really want to reach out and thank all of the corporate organizations that were involved in pulling together some of this data, because you can imagine the workload that some of those people were involved in as we were going through and doing the interviews and sharing, getting into the details and behind the scenes on a lot of this stuff. When does our LinkedIn Live session go live? Are we stepping right out of this and going into that session, Scott, or are we gapping a half an hour and then going to that session?
We have a half-hour gap, just allows us to shift our gears, get everything ready, and then we'll be back live so people can join us.
And then we'll be salting them in. And then I think, are there other ones, David, that you want to provide as just commentary to our community as kind of closing messages in here?
I would say that there's so many key points, but I would really suggest that your role as a business analyst is seminally important. And it's absolutely critical. And what we need to be doing is, to me, the number one thing that we've talked about, solving business problems. At the end of the day, it's very simple. Your company or your agency is going to look at you and say, how did you improve us? What difference was made? And a great business analyst understands that, hey, we better have a good answer to that question. So to me, those are some of the key things. And remember, this is a cultural shift. Becoming data-driven, it will not happen on its own. That I promise you. You have to have a program and an approach for doing it, because it's not the norm. We'd rather just go on gut instinct rather than really have data drive it.
Well, and I think from my perspective, the existence or absence of a business analyst is not a panacea. We can't simply say because there's somebody there who has that title that it's going to be successful. It comes back to skills. It comes back to driving and being mindful of, what do we focus on when we do these things? What do we focus in on to drive the value? Because that galvanizes the profession, that galvanizes data-driven, that galvanizes what the organization needs to accomplish and how they use business analysis effectively to accomplish these things. This is a significant shift, right? When we think about the future of where this is going, we are at the very beginning. We're just getting a taste of what data-driven is truly going to do for organizations. And I just love the comments that organizations like AB InBev say. It's like, we made a business analysis team. We made them accountable. Go do it. You be accountable for business value and make sure these things are getting done right, that we're spending money in the right areas. Well, with that means you got to build the skills. You got to know this profession, know this area, become more data literate. And there's a ramp there that people have to go through. But I think it's a very, very exciting time. And it's why I think the number one in-demand skill right now in the market is business analysis professionals in this area. Thank you, all of you, for participating in the session today. This has been fantastic. I love that we've got over 40 questions coming in, David. We have our work cut out for us, but 2,000 friends participating, and I wish you all great success. Cheers.
Take care.